Welcome, everyone. It's really good to see you all. I am super excited for our talk today, and I'm going to pass the mic to May to lead us off.
Thanks, Lauren. Welcome to the fifth school echo from the UCSF CAP program. And today's didactic would be on understanding and managing internalizing problems in the classroom, presented by Lindsey Bruett, PhD. She's a psychologist and associate clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at UCSF. She provides clinical care and supervision in eating disorders, anxiety, depression, trauma, OCD, suicide, and self-harm, gender diversity, and behavioral parent training. She leads the eating disorders program at Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital. She's also the adolescent mental health training lead at San Francisco General and an associate program director for the UCSF Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship Program. Welcome, Lindsey.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be with you all here today. Lauren, should I dive in? Excellent. Okay. Thank you, May. Thank you, Lauren. And thanks so much all for taking time out of your day to be here. Looking forward to spending the next hour with you. So before we dive in, we wanted to get a sense of how folks are feeling today, how folks are doing coming into this space. And so either May or Lauren is going to pull up a Zoom poll for us. And if you can please take a look at that and put in your answers, we would really appreciate it.
Is anyone having trouble seeing or accessing the 2-question poll? Okay, I see the answer is trickling in. We got about 2/3 in, so maybe let's give it one more minute. Oh, we're up to 3/4.
Okay, thank you all so much for filling that out. We know that you all carry enormous weight with the work that you do. And again, we're so grateful for you taking the time out of your day today. So we know that an evidence-based antidote to burnout is mindfulness. And so with that in mind, we wanted to start with a brief mindfulness practice today. It's also something that helps us bring our attention into this space for this time. So this is optional to participate. You can have your camera on or off, and we're just going to take a moment here. So I invite you to put down anything you may be holding and let yourself be supported by the surface you're sitting or standing on. For the next minute, I'd like you to focus your attention on your breath, not trying to change it in any way. You might say in, out as you breathe, or another mantra of your choice to do your best to keep your attention on your breath. When your mind wanders, which it naturally will, you can do your best to bring your attention back to your breath. You can go ahead now. Thank you for participating in that. This is a skill that you can use with a group of students or one-to-one or in staff meetings with permission as a way to transition and get settled into space. I invite those who are able to turn their cameras on. It's awesome for folks to be able to see each other and for me to be able to see you all. Understand that that's not feasible for everybody for the whole time. Okay, in terms of disclosures, we have no conflicts of interest to disclose. There's some information about our funding sources with the CAP portal program here. And we're going to be talking about internalizing symptoms today, and particularly a relevance between internalizing symptoms and school behaviors and ways to help with internalizing behaviors. So first of all, what are internalizing problems? They involve when students direct problems inward, tending to over-control emotions. This is in contrast to externalizing behaviors and symptoms, which you'll be learning about in a future week, in which kids are more kind of putting their emotions out there, acting out, things like that. Internalizing symptoms are a bit different. They may be related to depression and anxiety symptoms, but they are not necessarily a depressive or anxiety disorder. They're more difficult to notice than in externalizing behaviors. And this is something that you know from your experience when kids are acting aggressively or calling out in the classroom. That's more visible to us than when kids are becoming more withdrawn. Internalizing symptoms are incredibly common. They occur in about 30% of children, and they tend to become more prevalent as kids move through school. What does this look like? I want to highlight a couple of things here and have you read the rest. So one is irritability. This is a big one, particularly children and teens, but actually adults alike. Depression and anxiety often manifest as irritability. So snappiness, kind of decreased patience, things like that. That's something we often see. And then these physiological symptoms. We know that kids sometimes may be sick and they're just sick, but sometimes internalizing symptoms can manifest as things like headaches, stomach aches. We've all probably experienced, or many of us have probably experienced, being stressed out about something and getting a tension headache, or feeling anxious about something that's upcoming and getting a stomach ache. This is sort of along those lines. So kids who are tending to go to the nurse's office a lot for kind of amorphous complaints. We also know that internalizing problems can result in academic problems, like later missed assignments, can cause kids to withdraw socially, things like that. Next slide, please. Okay, so, and I actually want to rearrange my windows right here for 1 second. I've gotten new computer monitors and they're not totally cooperating with me at the moment. Okay, so can you go back a slide, May, to the windows? Thanks so much. Is forward one. Thanks so much. So as school staff, you have a unique window. So as folks like us who kind of sit in offices all day and don't have glimpses into kids in their real life, we sometimes feel like we're that person peeping through the blinds in the window. I know that this wide open window with a lovely vista is probably a little bit maybe not quite how it feels, but as school staff, you do have a really lovely opportunity to observe behaviors and subtle cues of children with internalizing symptoms across the school day. As psychologists outside of schools, you've probably experienced, we often rely on teacher and other school staff reports in conjunction with child and parent reports of symptoms when performing diagnostic evaluations, because we know that your input is so valuable. Not only do you have this window into young people's lives, but you also have extensive experience and ability to be able to sort of tease apart what's normative functioning versus something that's more concerning, because you work with so many kids year after year and are able to see them in their natural context with their friends and in class. Next slide, please. So a little bit of an interactive part here. I'd like you all to write in the chat a couple of ideas about, in your experience, what are some ways that internalizing problems may show up in the classroom? What might you be seeing or hearing from a student that might suggest they're having internalizing problems? An example here would be late assignments, Okay, so I see acting out, yes. Shutting down. Not completing work. Disengaging. Becoming more or less talkative. Physical complaints. Short responses, irritability. Absolutely. Sleeping in class, definitely. Okay, excellent. So I appreciate that. Keep them coming. And May, could you go to the next slide, please? Thanks so much. So many of you touched on many of these ways that we see internalizing problems show up in the classroom. I think big ones are social withdrawal, significant changes in academic performance, or ability to kind of get to class on time or show up to school at all. And also kind of emotional symptoms like hopelessness or helplessness. Okay, so what do we do about this? We know that this happens. We know that this is prevalent in classrooms and in schools. You've probably seen this in your own work. What do we do to help? Next slide, please. Oh, no, sorry. This is the perfect slide. Thank you. So we know that many schools implement school-wide intervention efforts, which are excellent, such as social emotional learning curricula. So that is fabulous. We are super glad that is happening. That won't be our focus today because schools are really well versed in doing those things. We'll focus mostly on tools that can help on the individual level or kind of at the moment you're having a concern. But I do want to just throw out these kind of general supports that you may be considering if you are seeing internalizing problems over a period of time. And you would, of course, want to consider, as you would naturally, the child's age, the severity and duration of the symptoms, your relationship with the student and family, and kind of deciding which, if any, of these supports to use. So you might discuss them with the student. Of course, you'd want to be descriptive and non-judgmental. So an example, hey, Lauren, I've noticed that you haven't been as talkative lately in class. You're not in trouble. I just wanted to check in. How have you been doing lately? That can open up a conversation. And then similarly, you might consider a conversation with the family, and similarly wanting to be really descriptive. So calling the family and describing exactly what you're seeing. So not just sort of like, hey, I've been worried about Sam lately, but more specifically, I've noticed that Sam seems more tired than usual in class. They turn in their last 2 papers late, which isn't like them. How do you think they're doing? Or how are things going? We might, of course, refer to the school counselor or consider more formal accommodations if needed. For example, if there's lots of missed assignments or things like that, kids may need some accommodations to catch up. I'm preaching to the choir here. You're all very well versed in these things. Okay, so moving on to tools that can help at an individual level. Thanks, May. So we know that because of the way that our brains function, and this is true for people of all ages, not just kids and teens, because of the way our brains function, it's incredibly hard, if not impossible, for humans to make decisions and think rationally when our emotions are running really high. We've probably all experienced doing or saying things in anger that we wouldn't otherwise say. Our judgment can become clouded. We may struggle to think rationally or logically. Similarly, for many of us, when we're very anxious, it can be hard to find words or make decisions. We may feel overwhelmed or stuck. It may make it difficult to even consider possible options. So because of this, we want to keep this in mind when we're supporting students. So when we're finding a student or coming across a student who's having internalizing problems, becoming dysregulated, we want to think about what level of dysregulation is this student experiencing in this moment. Because if they are, say, 3 or 4 out of 10 on a distress scale, so kind of like low to moderate levels of distress, they probably can listen to you, engage in problem solving, kind of have a conversation. On the other hand, if their distress is much higher, say an 8 out of 10 on the distress scale, they probably need support to regulate their emotions and feel calmer before they're able to think more clearly. And my guess is that as school staff, you're very familiar with what I'm talking about here. And Lauren and May, I can't super see the chat right now. So if anything's coming up that I should attend to, please interrupt me. Okay. So in terms of how we can help right now, we're going to take kind of 2 paths here. This first path that we're on is when the child or teen is experiencing really strong emotion. And so thinking about this as like a 7, 8, 9 out of 10 on the distress scale. So the first thing we can do is optional. So we can label the emotion, which we know is an emotion regulation strategy in of itself. For all of us humans and kids, knowing kind of what we're experiencing can help us actually to feel that emotion less strongly. So I might say, hey, Johnny, it looks like you're feeling really worried right now. If Johnny's not feeling worried, he may tell me that that's not right, or I'm actually feeling sad, or he may say nothing, and either way, it's okay. Then this is the key here. We want to insert a coping strategy. So we're actually going to practice this together. So I'd like you all to take a moment. Think about a distress scale, 0 being no distress at all, 10 being the highest distress you've ever felt. How would you rate your general distress right now? I'm not going to ask you this. This is private. You can think about it, have a number in mind, or write it down on a scrap of paper next to you. And I'll give you a moment to think about that. Okay, so we have our distress numbers in mind. Now let's practice a coping strategy together. So I would like us together to take, and again, this is optional. If you don't want to participate, you don't have to. I'd like you to take 5 deep breaths. And if I'm talking to a student, I'm going to say, hey, Johnny, let's take 5 deep breaths together. Ready? Great. And you'd want to do that along with the student. You might count with your fingers as you're going. Take a moment and rate your distress now, again, on that 0 to 10 scale.
And Lindsay, we have a question in the chat about if there's a specific distress scale you'd recommend. And May, I think Lindsay's on the next slide, actually.
Thank you. Some excellent questions here. So distress scale, I usually use a simple thermometer. You can literally write it out on a piece of paper with 0, 10, put the numbers in the middle. You can add kind of like faces to indicate the level of distress. Lots of these exist online as well, but there's no magic to kind of the scale that you use. Some people use 0 to 100. Whatever you want to do is totally fine. Littler kids obviously might benefit more from just faces and not numbers if they're not kind of super well versed in numbers right now. Okay.
And then somebody's asking too, what if they refuse to breathe with you?
Yeah, so if somebody is refusing to breathe with you, hold that thought. We'll get to that in a second. So looking at all of these coping strategies that we have listed here, these are just a sampling. There's tons of coping strategies out there. The kind of core of what we're trying to get at is helping to calm down the central nervous system. So these are all things that are designed to kind of like lower the heart rate and the other physiological responses that humans tend to have when they're very dysregulated. And so a couple that I like that I will point out here, one is intense exercise. So that last bullet on the left-hand side here. So an example would be doing 15 jumping jacks or as many jumping jacks as you can in 1 minute, or if it's appropriate in the space you have, maybe sprinting for a minute. I really also like the 3-2-1 grounding technique. So this is sometimes done as a 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique. You can do it any way you want, but an example is naming 3 things you see, 2 things you hear, 1 thing you touch. You can touch. This serves the purpose of grounding and bringing somebody into the space, kind of distracting away from how they're feeling in their internal state. And it's a really nice one. So you can see that many of these are very portable. Most of these you don't need equipment for, although some of them, things like cold paper towels or ice packs, can be really helpful. So in terms of what if the young person refuses to breathe with you, that can totally happen. And then I think you want to consider what your other options are. I mean, an excellent coping strategy can just be to take 2 minutes of quiet, or look out the window together. And so you might say, okay, I hear you that you don't want to breathe right now. Let's just sit quietly together. Or if you have another idea of something you'd like to do to feel calmer, you can let me know. So we talked about how when kids are very dysregulated and adults, making complex choices is very challenging and actually pretty impossible. But it is okay to consider offering very simple choices, like would you like to take a walk or take 5 deep breaths together? And if you have a kid who maybe is less prone to want to do something specifically because then when they're asked to do it, that might be a good option for you. Okay. And then if problem solving is still needed, so if the young person is very distressed because they don't want to go into class and you're doing these to help them calm down, obviously once they're calmer, you still need to figure out how to help them get to class or what the alternative is. So after the young person is calmer, then you can engage them in problem solving. You may also wind up stringing together multiple coping strategies or kind of doing it over a period of time, doing jumping jacks, taking a break, doing some more. Depending on the level of dysregulation and how long that person takes to return to baseline, and there's some individual differences there, as we know. Okay. Excellent. So this is sort of our second path that I described. So we talked about what to do if a young person is very high in the dysregulation scale or distress scale. This is the path that we would take if the young person is lower on the distress or dysregulation scale, or even if you've already used some of those calm down strategies. And so they're kind of calm enough to engage in conversation with you to make some decisions that are simple. And the reason I'm looking up is because I have you all on my monitor here in case anybody's wondering about that.
So I think we need the next slide, May.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yep.
Okay. So this is a 4-step process. This is one of many different ways to handle this, but I find it to be kind of a fairly straightforward process. So I like to share it with folks. So one is that emotional identification and labeling. As we talked about, we know that that is a emotion regulation strategy in of itself. And this can go one of 2 ways. And I'm going to have Lauren role play with me in a moment. So one would be, let's say Lauren is my student. Maybe she's like a 12-year-old and she's pretty upset about having to take a test. She's really stressed out about it. And so if she's sort of sitting there and I see that she's distressed, but she's not talking to me about it yet, I may say, hey, Lauren, it looks like you're feeling really worried right now. I'm kind of making my best guess of how she's feeling based on how she's acting. Again, she might respond and tell me that's wrong. That's great if she does. If she doesn't, it's okay. What if she makes a statement? So Lauren, can you tell me about how you're stressed out?
I'm just really stressed out about this algebra test today. It's like a huge portion of my grade and I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. So I'm just feeling really overwhelmed. I don't even want to do it.
I hear you, Lauren. This is really hard right now, especially given that you were up late. It makes sense that you're feeling stressed about this test. Okay. So I've done the emotion identification. I've done the validation. So that was the piece of like, it makes sense that you're feeling stressed. I hear you that you were up late. This is a big test for you. Sometimes you've probably all kind of thought about this in your own life, right? Like sometimes I heard this lovely set of phrases the other day, how we can express our needs or ask people their needs by asking them, do you want to be heard, hugged, or I forget what the other H was, but it's around problem solving. So sometimes we want validation, right? Sometimes we want problem solving. Sometimes we want physical comfort. Obviously, physical comfort less relevant for school. So we're focusing more on validation and problem solving. So we've validated Lauren. We've labeled her emotions. This might be enough. This might be all she needs to say like, okay, I'm going to go take the test now. If not, we have steps 3 and steps 4. May, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so next we're going to offer our words of support. So Lauren, I know you're stressed about this. I really believe in you. I know that you've studied really hard for this test. You've been doing well in this course so far this year. I really think that you can do this. Let's go walk down to your classroom together and we'll make sure that you get a seat near the window because I know that that makes you feel calmer. And then after you're done, you'll get to go out with your friends and eat lunch outside and that'll be more relaxing for you. Okay. So we've offered our words of support and we've offered help. And so these kind of set of 4 responses can be something that's lovely to just sort of keep in mind and run through with students. Sometimes people even like to write this down if kind of they know that this is coming. It's a nice kind of script to use that fits a wide variety of situations. Okay, next slide, please, May. Thank you. A couple of tips here. So of course, this comes to no surprise to all of you because you work with students. We want to convey calm and warmth in our body and tone. We know that if we match the student's dysregulation with our own dysregulation, that's going to make them feel more dysregulated. We talked about this a little bit on our brain slide, but if the student is very dysregulated, we want to avoid asking questions, particularly complex questions. If we have to ask a question, we want it to be quite simple. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to respond. They'll become quite overwhelmed. We want to be both warm and directive. So, Lauren, let's walk down to your classroom together. Come with me. This is a big one for thinking about validation scripts. We want to make sure that we're not saying that we understand if we may not. So an example of this is if a student is stressed out about a test, we might understand that. We might be able to think back to 7th grade math class and say, like, I understand how you feel. I remember I used to feel the same way. However, if a student, say, is coming to me and their sibling just passed away, that isn't something I've ever experienced. And so I want to make sure that I'm not saying, I understand how you feel. I understand why you're so sad, because I don't. And so alternative scripts that are kind of safer would be, I hear you that you're feeling sad. It makes sense that you're feeling sad given this terrible event that just happened to you. Lastly, a helpful regulation strategy for ourselves as adults supporting dysregulated kids can be separating the emotion from the student in your mind. This helps to build empathy and also to reduce frustration. So an example would be like, Lauren's feeling stressed out about the test and it's causing her to ask me lots of questions. That's her anxiety talking. She's not trying to be difficult. Or she's feeling sad about this thing that just happened in her family and it's causing her to be irritable in class, rather than kind of feeling like we're attributing it to the young person themselves or feel like they're kind of trying to do this on purpose to make our lives difficult. Okay, so we have, my next slide, please. A couple of video resources. So these are videos by UCSF faculty, which take us through some lovely relaxation and coping skills. So if you want kind of some extra practice with them, those are some nice short videos. You could also share them with families or with young people. And then the next slide, please. We also have a single slide with the coping skills listed out. So if you wanted to print this out or hand it out, you're absolutely welcome to do that. And thank you so much for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsey.